How Mafia bosses gain instant respect. Dark psychology tricks. Do you ever wonder why a single look, a quiet phone call, or a public gesture can make a room go still? Why some men and women in the underworld seem to command respect before they say a word? This isn't magic, it's method. It's psychology. And tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on the dark tactics Mafia bosses have used for decades to gain instant respect. The posture, the rituals, the theater, and the ruthless logic behind them. But one thing first. This video is a historical and psychological look, not an instruction manual. We'll analyze what happened, why it worked, and the heavy cost that followed. Respect built on fear is fragile and often catastrophic. The hook. The quiet that follows a look. A man enters the room. No one speaks to people stun, then slowly sit again. A cigarette is crushed in a heavy ashtray. That silence, that's respect, earned in seconds. And it's the result of carefully engineered behavior. The introduction. Why this matters. Understanding these tactics matters because they reveal how humans respond to threat, authority, and ceremony. In the real world, the same levers can be used for good or ill leadership, influence, manipulation. Studying the dark side helps us recognize and resist it. Today we'll walk through the psychological toolbox of the mob boss. Presence, ritual, reciprocity, calculated generosity, public theater, controlled violence, reputation, economics, and social proof. For each tactic, we'll use real stories, then pull back to the ethical and legal costs behind them. Presence. The economy of silence. Respect often begins before words. A boss who walks slowly, holds eye contact, and consumes space is communicating confidence. Scientists call this non-verbal dominance. In mob culture, presence is amplified by dress and grooming, tailored suits, clean shoes, a distinctive accessory. It's visual shorthand. This person is successful, controlled, untouchable. Voice and pacing. Measured speech, low tone. Deliberate pauses. They force listeners to lean in. Controlled movement. A boss never rushes. Every motion is an assertion. I am calm. I am safe. I am in charge. Story snapshot. Think of the old photos of 20th century dons, stepping off cars in polished shoes, hands in pockets, unhurt. The image itself communicated competence and dominance before a single word was spoken. Mafia bosses used ritual to signal membership and to cement loyalty. Ceremonial meetings, formal gatherings, specific seating, rules for speaking. They create a sense of order and tradition. Symbolic acts, giving a ring, a cigar, or a specially arranged table. These tokens confer status, initiation rites, secret oaths, and symbolic acts that bind members through shared meaning. Ritual does two things psychologically. It creates exclusivity. You're either in or out, and it reduces cognitive dissonance. Members rationalize risk because they VA publicly committed. Reciprocity and material generosity. Deadass control, a core human rule. We repay kindness. Mafia bosses weaponize that rule in subtle ways. Selective generosity, loans, paid funerals, and small but meaningful gifts build emotional debt. Patronage networks. Bosses funded businesses, events, or families, creating networks of obligation. Economic dependence. When people depend on you for jobs or protection, their ability to oppose you shrinks. Important ethical note. Generosity that creates indebtedness is manipulation disguised as kindness. Many small favors add up to powerful control. High visibility, charity, or public presence. Donate to the right charity. Stand at a ribbon-cutting smile for cameras. It recasts a criminal as a local pillar. Public punishments or displays. Sometimes brutal, sometimes symbolic. These acts send a message. Cross me and you will pay. Controlled scandal. Orchestrating an event that convinces onlookers the boss is untouchable or invincible. A public image is powerful because most people know others' impressions before they know facts. The theater feeds social proof. Reputation, economics, investing in fear and respect. Reputation is currency. Maintaining it requires predictable behavior. reward loyalty, punish betrayal. For mafia bosses, calibrated cruelty violence, used sparingly and publicly to generate fear. If used too much, it becomes chaos. Too little, and the threat loses credibility. Consistency. A boss's reputation grows when their actions match their promises. If they promise protection, they must enforce it. Third-party signals alliances with other powerful figures, endorsements, or effective media manipulation amplify reputation. This is where dark psychology meets game theory. Threats are credible only when the cost to enforce them is believable. Social proof and influence the crowd as witness people look to others to decide what's appropriate. The mob exploited social proof in several ways. Controlled entourages. Surround the boss with visible followers who act different. Observers assume the boss deserves respect. Selective alliances. Align with local leaders, law enforcement insiders, or businessmen who then model deference. Cultivating myth. Stories of past exploits circulate, making the boss seem larger than life. When enough people behave as if someone is powerful, that perception becomes reality. Introduce a problem. Challenge the fragility of fear-based respect. Here's the problem. Respect that depends on fear, an image is brittle. It collapses when the theater ends, when legal pressure mounts, or when the boss fails to deliver benefits. Fear masks instability, it doesn't eliminate it. Rival escalation. Rivals respond to threats with counter-threats, creating conflict cycles. Law enforcement pressure. Public brutality draws scrutiny. Media attention invites investigation. Internal betrayal, personal bonds strained by fear lead to informants and fractures. The stronger the image, the higher the fall when it happens. Exploration. Development, case studies, and consequences. Case study 1. The charismatic public face some bosses. This gained social cover and friendly eyes in the community, but it also normalized their influence, made them a fixture, and increased legal exposure. When prosecutions came, the same visibility that shielded them served as evidence. Case study 2. The calculated enforcer others favored private, carefully executed punishments that were known within the network, but kept out of headlines. This approach produced a stable inner circle and a tightly enforced order, until internal greed or a law enforcement sting created the cascade that brought everyone down. Case study 3. The fall, overreach, and exposure time and again. History shows a similar arc. Accumulation of power, a public display that overreaches, then a legal or violent backlash. The cost is human, imprisonment, family ruin, violence, and sometimes death. Lesson. The methods that build fear and respect also sow the seeds of collapse. Climax. Key moments. The psychological turning point. There is a crucial psychological turning point, where respect born of image can be converted into genuine leadership, but only when it is replaced by legitimacy. From fear to loyalty, true leaders cultivate respect through competence, justice, and reciprocity without coercion. From theater to service, the moment a figure stops performing for the crowd and begins serving the community, the nature of influence changes. From manipulation to accountability, the real pivot is transparency and responsibility. Without these, respect remains performative. The climax here is a choice: continue the cycle of fear or build lasting influence through constructive means. Conclusion. Summary. What we learned. Let's pull this together. Mafia bosses have historically used a predictable set of psychological levers to gain instant respect, presence, and controlled nonverbal dominance. Rituals that cement hierarchy, strategic generosity that creates debts, public theater to shape perception, reputation economics rooted in selective enforcement, social proof to make power feel inevitable. But with those methods come steep costs, violence, legal consequences, fractured communities, and personal ruin. The long-term lesson for anyone studying influence is clear. Influence built on fear is temporary. Influence built on trust and service endures. If you're interested in power dynamics, leadership, or dark psychology, analyze these tactics so you can recognize manipulation, then choose the ethical path. Influence that uplifts, not crushes. If you found this deep dive eye-opening, hit subscribe and watch the next video on mob psychology to learn how leaders can rise without fear.